Sexton trying to get loose. He'll fire. Hey! Knocks it down.
Okoro slammed it home.
Garland upstairs. Oh!
Sexton inside. A thunderous dunk. And Allen blocked the shot at the rim.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs Media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. Support for this podcast and the following message comes from Zoom. 500,000 businesses connect using Zoom, a single platform for phone, chat, workspaces, events, apps, and video. Zoom enables real-time collaboration for teams around the globe. Zoom, how the world connects. And connecting with me now live via Zoom is my co-host, Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. I have finally gotten through the hurt, and I'm just enjoying playoff basketball. Felt really, really good about my surprisingly controversial Bucks and Bucks prediction against the Celtics. Yeah. I would love to talk a little basketball, a little playoff basketball with you at some point in this pod, because your boy feels like he pegged that series just right, and it's fun. It's fun getting back into just watching basketball without actively bemoaning our team's situation not being there.
That's very fair. You know what? I'm at a point where I miss talking to you, man. Going once a week right now feels so weird.
It does feel weird. It feels like we haven't talked in months. Which is both a beautiful thing, because I think from a content perspective, we're a little more fresh. We don't necessarily know exactly where we're at. I did like your Bucks and 7 take. I think we have seen in the past having the best player in a series can make a really big difference. And I think it's pretty safe to say that Giannis is that dude for Milwaukee. Yeah, I mean, he is. It is. And, I think that take wasn't super popular as a reason for picking the Bucks because of what the Boston Celtics just did to Kevin Durant. But you got to remember a couple things. Kevin Durant kills you, 12 to 17 feet from the basket, and Giannis kills you right at the rim. And you can take out Kevin Durant's legs, especially on that Brooklyn team that, just didn't really have enough juice around him. And you could chip him on every off-ball action and make him catch the ball 19 feet out and stagnate the rest of the offense while he attacked, some of these switches. With Milwaukee, the switch thing stops mattering when no matter who you put on him, you end up needing to send 3 dudes to the ball. And go ahead.
I was going to say there's actually a bit of a parallel, because Milwaukee plays defense pretty similar to the Cavs, where they say, we're not letting you get anything in the middle. We are taking away the paint. You've got Brook Lopez in there that does a great job of rim protection. Giannis obviously roaming in kind of the super Mobley role defensively. And they've kind of forced the lesser 3-point shooters to take and make those shots, right? Like Al Horford and all those guys. And those 3-point looks aren't coming in the form of driving kicks.
And here's the thing, they're not that good at shooting. Like that was the big conceit that I thought was so, like, I couldn't believe I felt like everyone overreacted to that Brooklyn series, because not only did they have some good personnel to mess with KD, the Nets had so little personnel to stay in a good shape defensively because of how small all of their guards are, that you could just mismatch hunt and you could get 2 or 3 on the ball, whereas Brooklyn doesn't overcommit, and Boston made 10 2-point field goals in that game. They did not score in the mid-range. They did not score at the rim. So they were just chucking with dudes who aren't that good at chucking. And and by the way, they shot a pretty respectable percent on those 53-point attempts. I think they hit 38%. Like, perfectly good enough to win a game in which you shoot 53s. And they didn't come close. Their offense absolutely got strangled. And yeah, I just think Giannis is such a hard matchup for them, because the whole value is that, okay, we can put Marcus Smart on you and be fine, and you can't put Marcus Smart on Giannis and be fine. And in a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me of some of those Celtics teams that the Cavs played when they were making their finals runs, where it's like, okay, yeah, Marcus Smart is great and all, but not against LeBron James. And that's the level of player we're talking about here, where it's just too hard to stop the guy, and their bigs are not quick-footed, with the exception of Robert Williams. And I just thought that their offense would really crater in the half court,
and Milwaukee would generate enough good looks to be able to attack them. And I think they more than did that, with the added benefit of Drew Holiday having an awesome game. And I thought he was going to have a horrific series.
I love Drew Holiday, man. And we talked about as the season went on and after the All-Star break that the Cavs are giving up the same amount of wide open 3-pointers. It's just those shots were going in at a higher rate. And I think some of that is when you generate shots via the driving kick. Often the shooter on the perimeter is already facing the basket. They catch it right in the basket and you shoot, right? Versus if you're not allowing that interior penetration and the ball circling on the perimeter, you're turning to the side and bringing up the shot, right? Like it is a completely different quality of outside look. And I think that's part of why the Cavs defense wasn't as effective down the stretch last year. And I also am not surprised that the teams the Cavs lost to in the play-in got handled in the first round in both Brooklyn and Atlanta, because if you were that close to losing to the banged up zombie Cavs, Evan Mobley coming back after a couple weeks out, Jared Allen playing with one hand, and guys that a starting lineup that had never played a minute together all season long, you are probably going to lose to very, very good defensive teams, which is what Miami is and what Boston is. And Milwaukee is another team of that caliber. So I think you're spot on with your analysis, but I don't think it's surprising that the teams that barely got by the Cavs, because Brooklyn did a pretty good job of blowing that lead too. I'm not surprised that they would blow those same leads when they were able to acquire them against the Boston Celtics.
Yeah, and the other thing that's worth noting here with Brooklyn is they were way more competitive with Boston than a sweep indicates. They lost by like 17 total points. So it's not like
they felt a little 2017 Cavs Warriors in that sense.
Yeah. And like, I don't know, man. I just think people do not understand how much better Giannis is than everyone else right now on a team that has an identity. Like, I don't think Giannis is that much better than KD right now, but his team wasn't fundamentally broken. And that goes a long way when you're missing a star like Chris Middleton.
Well, this all ties in very well to the first question in our mailbag. And thank you so much to all the listeners that either gave us a mailbag.
We got a lot of mailbag questions.
Tons of questions. Everyone wants to talk Cavs, Carter. This is what I've been trying to tell you. The appetite is still there for some good Cavs content. And Colin asked if there is a player that on a team that was eliminated in the first round that we would like on the Cavs, within reason, of course, because I think our hopes of someone like Brandon Ingram, or I guess they weren't eliminated in the first round, but Jaylen Brown, like all of those hopes were kind of banking on Boston or New Orleans, like those situations falling apart. Those situations aren't falling apart. Those are very good teams that have good young cores that are going to be good for a long time. We can write that off. But are there any players on teams that were eliminated in the first round that stick out to you as maybe a free agent or trade target, Carter?
I'm going to go on a quick detour because I don't think I noticed that the 1 through 4 seeds in each conference advanced. There was not a single upset set in the first round, as far as I can tell. That is actually pretty funny. Within reason, not many players that like really jump out to me. I think a guy like OG Anunoby, you look at how many wings are.
I'm offended you even brought up that name because
he's not really within reason, but you get what I'm saying. Like,
yeah, even if the Cavs had the best trade offer, like out of any team, I feel like Toronto would take less to send him out of the conference and to not put him with Mobley and Jared Allen. There is no way Masai Ujiri would ever want to do that. I would not trade OG. But
I wouldn't either.
Guys that stick out to me, we've mentioned Bogdanovich. If Utah were to blow it up, that might get a little tricky from a contract perspective. I don't know necessarily how you would go about doing that.
If Mike Conley wasn't making so much, I'd love him as a backup, but he's making so much.
That's a bit of a tough sell. But speaking of backup point guards, DeLon Wright, free agent that I think I would have some interest in bringing into the mix for the Cavs. I think that he's someone that you can definitely see splitting time with both Garland and Sexton, assuming Collins back or Karis LeVert or whoever. Like he's turned into a very, very quality backup player. So those are the only ones that really jump out to me. We'll probably get a better sense of
There's a few fringe guys. Gorgie Jang is someone I'm pretty interested in at the backup 5. As a
Patrick Beverly, I would love.
that would be fun. I just don't think you can afford him after the year he's had.
Yeah.
And I'd rather afford someone else, I guess, would be the nice way to say that. So yeah, I think those are the names that jump out. I mean, I'm going to be pining for Ingram till he retires at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's that is certainly fair. Corey Walsh, friend of the podcast, asks, with the 14th pick, do you think that the Cavs should go for a specialist like Ochai Agbaji or best player available regardless of fit? Carter, what do you think?
I think I don't know, man. It's really hard. I think you have to do some version of a hybrid here. On one hand, you have the time because it's weird. People either talk about the Cavs like they have all the time in the world or they have no time and they should try to win now. And the answer is probably yes to both of those. From the perspective of their wing situation was pretty painful when it came to games that counted, and it stunk that they didn't have wings that JB felt like he trusted out there. So yes, they kind of need a wing. But on the other hand, they also pretty much proved they have a 44-45 win core without any of those wings. So I think that you kind of have to look at the prospect menu in front of you and say, okay, do we want someone who we don't think projects to ever fit next on the wing next to Evan Mobley and Jared Allen? Maybe not. If it's someone you don't ever think is going to be, what that a guy that can jive with those two, then maybe you don't take him, even if you think he's the best prospect on the board. But you don't just take low upside guys just for safety. If you look at a guy like a Baji, you think okay, the best version of him is really exciting and valuable. So I don't think that, it's so binary, I guess, would be my muddled answer to that.
Yeah, and we'll get into this a little bit with the next question, but I think the fortunate thing from a Cavs perspective is you look at mock drafts across the board and the players that are in that range, that late lottery to even, let's say, early 20s, it's a lot of small forwards. It's a lot of wings that are 6'6", 7-foot wingspan that can fill a need. And I don't know if it's even necessarily fair to call Agbaji a specialist. He is a good athlete, he's a good defender, he can shoot, although there were streaky portions of his season at Kansas. The one thing I would caution people against is, even though he's an older prospect, he's going to be turning 22 soon. These are still guys that haven't got with an NBA training staff. And I think too often we kind of fall into the trap of thinking, hey, these guys are finished products. When you look at even someone like Pascal Siakam that spent 4 years in college, or Desmond Bane, Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges, all of these guys, there's still growth to be done, especially when you do get these prospects with pros. The thing I'll say about the 14th pick is I don't think there's necessarily going to be a consensus best player available. I think you get more of that group think earlier in the draft. You'll see a lot of the mock drafts and big boards have pretty much the same order at the top of the draft. Once you get to 14, I think it's an eye of the beholder situation. And I think some of your drafting process has to go with, who do we have confidence in our ability to develop within the situation that we have, right? If you're picking between guys that are in a very similar tier, which guy do we feel fits with our current roster, and what guy has the best chance of flourishing with us? Because honestly, at this point, the talent is probably going to be even within a lot of these guys, and it's going to come down to your ability to develop that talent. So I think that needs to be more of the consideration versus talent in a vacuum.
I couldn't agree more, man. I think this is a great spot to move down to the next question on the mailbag. Take us there.
Absolutely. So big thanks to both Frankie and Tyler. Current, very common theme in this mailbag is we had a lot of people asking very similar questions, which makes sense. I mean, there's only a finite number of topics, but they asked, who are some of the names we like at 14, and what guys should the listeners be familiarizing themselves with? So, Carter, how much of the draft have you been diving into over the last couple of weeks?
I'm still not where I want to be yet. We really got to get a smart draft guy on the pod here pretty soon. I think people are getting hungry for that as we get closer to the draft lottery, which is getting closer and closer. But I mean, Abaji is the guy I've probably paid the most attention to, just because he's right there. He's right there. The measurables are there. The body is there. And he's got just enough intriguing stuff that makes me, angsty. Like, there's a reason this guy is not, there's a reason that he didn't go into the draft earlier in his career. There's a reason that he's still mocked at 14. It's not, he hasn't really flashed much creation, which is something the Cavs have needed. But you just look at a guy who kind of gives you that Danny Green vibe of, and that's kind of my favorite, very, very favorable comp, which is a very fringe outcome, by the way. There are not a lot of guys with Danny Green's college stat profile that turn into Danny Green. So you are actually kind of betting on a long shot there, but you just kind of see the mold of being a guy who can hit a high volume of his 3-point shots and defend. It's just,
and is a good athlete.
It seems pretty tailor-made for this team and what they need. But, so I think he's the one I'm most interested in. Dyson Daniel is very interesting, though. He is like, I feel like he is the high upside version, of Agbaji, but similar size on the wing, but obviously much smaller, but the man can't shoot. So that's the problem with a lot of these higher upside wings on the board, is most of them can't shoot. So I don't know. Where are you at?
And that seems to be such a common thread with the prospects coming into today's NBA. Like, it's so funny because I feel like each draft is getting deeper and deeper. You're getting rotation players, and there's so many good young players coming into the league, but it does seem like there's a trend of guys that need to develop a jump shot. And I'm at the point where, when you're talking about prospects for the Cavs at 14, I don't want a player that doesn't take threes. I would rather have a guy that shoots 7 a game at like 34%, but at least has that shooter mentality, versus a guy where you have to start from scratch. I just don't think you're going to be able to get that player the reps that they need, looking at the depth that the Cavs already have. Like, if you're looking on the perimeter, like Isaac Okoro is going to be a guy that's already in that mix, but Karis LeVert, Larry Markkinen, Dean Wade, Lamar Stevens, Colin Sexton, like all these guys in kind of the 2-3 spots, like, it's going to be tough for a guy to get the reps that he needs to really develop a jump shot. I would rather have a guy with a shooter's mentality that maybe needs a little bit of work. But when you look at someone like Agbaji or really my rule of thumb when it comes to players that spend 3-4 years in college is they better have a refined skill. Like, they have to have at least one refined skill at that point for me to feel confident about drafting them. If a guy's been in college for 4 years, I don't necessarily trust drafting someone that you hope, maybe he can be the straw that stirs the drink. I don't think that that's there. I think if that's what you're hoping for, you go younger at that point. But if it's someone that's bringing a skill to the table, like Mikal Bridges and his defense and 3-point shooting, or Cam Johnson, same boat. Brandon Clark, who, he had flaws and he was older, but very clearly had a skill that can automatically translate to a rotation, I'm comfortable with that. So Agbaji's probably my top guy. Some of the other guys I really like, Malachi Brannon is at the very opposite end of the spectrum. I think that's such a fun story with him.
Offense.
Offense, baby. There's a lot of redundancies there with Karis LeVert, not just because they wear the same number and Ohio State, but also just the fun story of the guy that grew up in Akron, St. Vincent, St. Mary's, Ohio State. Like that, I really like that. I think he can bring a lot to the table. His teammate, EJ Liddell. Marjon Beauchamp, I think, is a really interesting prospect. Spent the last year in the Ignite.
Real quick, back to Liddell. I would be interested to hear from a draft guy, because I haven't done much scouting on him. I know he's kind of listed as a power forward, but he got up 4 threes a game and shot it at 37% and wasn't a terrible free throw shooter, about 77%. I wonder, is he a guy who could be, could at least spend some time at the 3, especially on this Cavs team? I'm curious, because he kind of seems small for a 4. And man, could this team use a big 3 with a little bit of juice off the dribble?
And I do think that the benefit for the Cavs is I think you can either go with a small 4 or a big 2 at the 3 position just because of the defensive versatility of Mobley and Allen. I think that opens up possibilities with who you can draft or who you can even bring in through a trade or free agency. I do think that there's a value to that. So he's one of the guys I haven't done as much on. Everyone I'm listing here, I've watched at least 20 minutes of YouTube videos on them, scouting breakdowns, but we definitely need to bring in an expert because
we're pretty stupid.
We're out of our depth here, let's be honest. But Marjon Beauchamp, as I said, is someone that I really find interesting. Didn't shoot well on a very low volume with the Ignite, but did shoot almost 40% on 9 attempts per game in his 1 year in college. So
can I ask you a wider question?
Mm-hmm.
We are exclusively talking about wings or people who we think might project as wings. Yeah. Are you willing to take someone who is not a wing? Let's say Ty Washington from Kentucky, the point guard, falls down to 14.
Again, that's probably going to have to be a spot where I need to trust kind of the talent evaluation that, hey, this guy is someone that we really need to bring in. It's just, I just don't see how we would be a situation where we'd be able to develop this. And this isn't.
What about a center?
Center,
center is interesting. A guy like Mark Williams. I could talk myself into. Like there is something to that. I mean, Mark Williams is a beast of a prospect.
I would prefer
Duke.
One that could shoot.
Well, yes,
I'll say that.
I mean, I don't think he took A3 in college at Duke, but all I'm saying is like that is the other spot. But I will say, from a team building perspective, I'm just not interested in more young bigs. I want a veteran who I can play for 20 minutes in a big game at this point, and at the backup 5. Or if someone gets hurt.
That's pretty much where I'm at.
Sounds like wing or bust to me.
Yeah, and this isn't like when friend of the podcast, Jonathan Wasserman, last year had the Cavs as the worst landing spot for almost everyone in the draft, including Cade, Mobley, Jalen Green, I think, Scotty Barnes. Like, I think all of them were.
We got to get him on the pod just to roast him for that.
We do need to bug him. We do need to bug him about that because I do love his coverage, but he needs to take the L on that one. But yeah, like a lot of the prospects in that range are wings. And for that reason, like I just don't think that this is a spot where you overthink it. The other names, Dyson Daniel, Ousmane Dieng, and Nikola Jovic are the other ones that I would list.
Jovic is just falling on the Tankathon big board, man. He just keeps going down. He's down to 22.
He would certainly fit in with the kind of Lauri Markkanen big 3 type vibe that we have going on. A little more raw than I'd like. My bias is probably towards guys like Abaji and Branham, but that's kind of my at least early sense. And we definitely need to get someone smart here. But Don Vinsanity asks, should we keep or trade the pick? Which I guess kind of fits in with this conversation that we're having of, can we develop someone? What's our level of confidence in developing someone with the 14th pick, or do you go with a more established option? Carter, what's your thought?
I think you are looking and making calls that involve the pick. I don't think that you should ever lock yourself into a strategy. I think that, I don't know. I guess here's the more interesting question: is what's the worst kind of player you'd include the pick in a trade for? Like, I'm not super interested in trading for an 8th man or a 7th man with the 14th overall pick. And when you look at the amount of talent on the Cavs roster right now, you pretty much have your top 5 locked in right now, top 5 or 6. So to me, it's at that point you're taking one of those top 5 or 6 and 14 and then making a move. And if you're doing that, you better get a pretty darn good player. So, like, to that point, I just think they should not trade the pick unless they get someone who's going to be a top 5 or top 6 player for them.
Here's the way I'll put it. This is a tricky question because I think my preference would be for this pick to be traded. Obviously, you'd have to draft the player first and then trade their rights after the fact. That makes everything more complicated. It's a draft night deal, blah, 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 blah. But like my preference would be that, because I at least have a level of confidence. I don't think the Cavs would trade this if it was just like something for just next year. I don't think we're in that win now position. I think if you look at like the promotion and extension of Kobe Altman, the extension of JB Bickerstaff, it kind of feels like we're entering a 5-year plan with the Cavs. And I would say when I look at Garland, Mobley, Allen, Sexton, Okoro, and Lowry, and I'll even put this 14 pick in there, if I'm moving any of those players or the pick, I want someone that is going to be able to have an impact on the Cavs for the next 4 years. I think that's how I would look at it. Maybe not necessarily what's their spot in the rotation, because let's be honest, if you're using the pick, it's not going to be a top 5 guy in the rotation. I find that to be unlikely. It would be great if that's how it worked out, but I just don't see that to be the case. But if
I guess here's the case,
Yeah,
though. Let me counter. I want to counter that specific point, which is you are getting someone cost controlled and young to be your 7th or 8th guy. So you don't have to get equivalent value in the rotation with your pick as what you're getting back in the trade because of all the value you get from having a cost controlled rookie.
Yeah, that's certainly a fair point, but that pick would likely be in combination with someone else that's got more term on the contract. So especially if it's combined with someone like Lauri Markkanen, let's say, as an opportunity to make a move for a more conventional 3 that maybe gives them a little more versatility in how they can play, that, that's probably going to be a spot where maybe you're extending that player for more, or it's going to be a similar contract. So it does get tricky. My preference would be to move it, but there really are a lot of interesting prospects that I think fit in well with the Cavs needs. And at the end of the day, like, adding a wing that can hit threes and play defense is one of the toughest things to do in the NBA. So the fact that there are prospects like that maybe don't necessarily have really high upside, it's not a top of the draft prospect, but they fit a need for the Cavs on a team that's already pretty complete in a lot of ways. There is an appeal to that for me in keeping the pick.
I hear you, man. It's an interesting spot, and like the boring answer is they should trade it if they get good value for it. They shouldn't trade it if there's a player they like or they can't get good value for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and is boring, but that's probably the case. Patrick Long asks, do we see the Sexton LeVert situation as a pick one option, or can we envision a scenario where both or neither are on the Cavs next season?
I think that that is a next year conversation in a lot of ways to me. I think Colin, there's no reason you don't keep Colin right now, barring some ridiculously challenging salary conversations. I just think it makes so much sense to bring him back, and then really it's a year audition for Karras to see how he fits. Because Colin, I think, has earned the right to have that first dibs spot, and then you kind of see, hey, is this going to work with Karras? That's kind of my first blush reaction to the question.
Yeah, I can definitely see a scenario where both are on the Cavs next season. I would say that, well, I mean, obviously Sexton, if he's back, he needs to be on a new contract. So if we're assuming that he's back, he's on one. LeVert, extending him.
But the thing is, you don't have to. Reminder for everyone, Karras LeVert's under contract next season. So
right,
even if you don't extend him, he will be playing here next season, barring a trade.
Yeah, so I think that's probably the more likely scenario. I think he's actually an interesting player as an expiring contract and someone that is extension eligible, that is still relatively young. I think that might be an interesting trade possibility with the 14th pick if you're looking to add a player. But I can definitely see, like, when we're talking about what the Cavs need, the fact that he is a big wing that has length, that can provide some shot creation, that he's a very good pick and roll ball handler that unfortunately didn't get to play with Jared Allen after the trade deadline. Like all of these things, like I think that the conditions are right for him to have a better season next year with the Cavs and maybe log some minutes at the 3 behind Lauri Markkanen. Like I think there is certainly a spot for him. So I can see a scenario where both are on the roster next year. Frankly, I can't see one where they're both not. Like I just, if you're moving like LeVert and Sexton, I just don't think that there's going to be a player available that warrants that kind of move. Like I'm not expecting a massive shakeup this offseason with the Cavs. I think it's going to go pretty run it back with some tweaks to the rotation and add pieces. Like that's my blind guess. I think it's important that we should clarify because we never know when we have new listeners. We're not a sources podcast. We do the best we can to add context and give our opinion on the information that the hard workers that run the beat provide. And thank God that they do that work because I don't know how to vet information or anything like that. But I just don't see a scenario where that type of player is available that would justify moving both of those pieces.
No, I don't either. I think they're both gonna play, but I think if Colin signs, they're both gonna at least spend some time on the floor together next season. Now, if it's not looking great, you might see a decision on moving a guy like Karras happening earlier. If it doesn't look like it's working. But I would be stunned to have them not play minutes together as long as Colin is re-signed. I think, as I mentioned, that decision would be a next year decision, offseason decision on whether to bring back Karras. Pyrotechnic,
I'm definitely pronouncing that wrong, but I don't know how to pronounce your Twitter handle. I'm sorry, man. Asks, if we do sign Sexton, should we stagger both he and Garland's minutes while playing them together maybe 5-10 minutes a game, as he is not confident on Mobley and Allen's ability to cover them up on defense when both are in the game? Now, I'm going to jump on this first, Carter.
I knew you would.
As the pastor of the Sexland, just someone that's been trying to get this off the ground for so long, I truly believe in their ability to play together, and I think it's also important to note that throughout their entire time together, the Cavs have been staggering their minutes. You look at the last few years, and Sexton's minutes without Garland this year was only 13. Before that was 17, 14 the year prior. Like, even though they start together, starting them together is actually the easiest way to stagger them. Because if you're talking about Sexton only playing 5 to 10 minutes a game with Garland, that is not very easy to do if you're assuming that Garland's playing 34 minutes a game, and Sexton's better than that. Like, you can't have him be a 20-minute per game player. I just don't see that being tenable. And frankly, Sexton's been better historically when you look at it with Garland. And if there's going to be a time where you can make that pairing tenable, it's with the starters. Now, I would with Mobley and Allen, that probably gives you your best chance to do that. But at the same time, it's not like Caris LeVert is some great defender. Like, we have managed to have good defenses with multiple poor defenders on the court at the same time, or at least guys that aren't good individually defensively. So especially if you make a move for a small forward that is good defensively, like Sexton's fine on ball, it's off ball where I have the concerns. So if Sexton's close to what he's been in the past, obviously it's going to take some time coming off of the surgery, I would start them together because I think that is the easiest way to stagger them, where Sexton comes off after 3-4 minutes, and then he's playing a lot of minutes with the second unit, and depending on how that's going, it determines who you have on the floor when you're closing.
I think, one, you nailed it. And two, if you're staggering these guys, you're actually staggering them to make sure you have at least one dynamic ball handler on the floor at all times, not to try to limit their exposure to one another. You are spot on in saying that nobody will insulate them better than the Frobley pairing in the front court, as well as the size that they play at small forward with Lowry right now, which is what I imagine their starting lineup will be next season. And I know we might talk about that. But yeah, I just think they work together pretty well. And the idea that they don't work together very well is a little outdated, to be honest. So I think if anything, it's, especially if you don't get a backup point guard you love, you might want to, you might want to stagger it a little bit more. But like, I don't think that should be a goal of JB Bickerstaff's rotations. In fact, I think it's the inverse. I think hopefully they can build a bench unit that has enough ball handling punch with Karras perhaps there that you can let those guys play with Tower City as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure we're going to get to this soon, but thinking of Sexton being with the second unit and some of the juice that they might have, like even if they're running it back, like it's pretty exciting of some of the lineups that the Cavs can put together. S. Erickson asks who the Cavs should bring back outside of the core rotation players, the players that he kind of highlighted that he's curious about. Who do you think should be back necessarily of Windler, Wade, Goodwin, Stevens, Moses Brown, RJ Nembhard, and Jetty Osman?
Well, it's important to note that except Goodwin and Moses Brown, all those players, I believe, are under contract for next season. So they're all coming back, buddy. But I think I'm going to answer in the spirit of the question, which is who do you want to kind of keep around in the long term? I think you look at a guy like Dean Wade, and it's just hard not to see him as a guy that you want to keep on your roster. He's relatively cost-controlled, great practice guy, great, very flexible piece who can be out of the rotation for a month and then come in and play 25-30 minutes for you if you're beat up at two or three different positions. Similar vibes to Lamar Stevens. Like if that's your 11th and 12th man on a roster, you're really feeling very, very good about yourself because both those guys can come in and actually help, which is really all you're looking for. Like 11th, 12th, 13th men, you were looking for human beings who can help you sometimes. And those guys have proven that they are capable of doing that and sometimes much more. So I think those guys are definitely like and like the other thing that that plays in their favor, frankly, is I don't think those are guys that have delusions of grandeur. I don't think they're like, oh, I should be getting 35 minutes a game. These guys are grinders, undrafted players who earned and fought for every scrap they've gotten in the league so far. And those guys are really good for you culturally. So I think those guys are definitely going to be around long term. I think, this is Windler. They picked up Windler's option, so he'll be here next year. I don't know. It feels like it's kind of a make or break year for him where it's like, are you going to be a guy that is going to make it here or not? Because, JB clearly has had trust issues with him when he's been healthy. He hasn't been healthy much. And then, and then finally I'm going to close on Jetty. Jetty, the way the playoffs played out or the play-in games played out for him didn't seem to bode well. But that doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way. But that's kind of my reaction. Curious what you think.
Yeah, the only ones I really feel super strongly about are Wade and Stevens because I just have a hard time envisioning any team that would value them more than the Cavs right now. And that's not to say that like they wouldn't have value on another roster. It's just those guys are on reasonable deals. They're just good rotation pieces for the Cavs. And I feel very good about them being on the bench. And I know that both of those guys are ready when their number gets called. Same thing with Windler and Jetty that you said, where just the fact that it doesn't seem like the confidence that the coaching staff had in them was consistent kind of makes me feel like, okay, well, if you feel good about them, if you're going through the offseason, I'm sure they're going to be keeping in touch with all these guys because they are under contract still. If there's an opportunity to bring them back and have them be contributors, that would be exciting because Jetty Osman helped the Cavs win a lot of games last year. Dylan Windler, I still can't get over how many games he actually played for the Cavs. That doesn't feel real, but the flashes were there. But in terms of like who I feel strongly about bringing back, it's Wade and Stevens. Outside of that, like you just kind of have to trust the talent evaluation because I'm sure they're going to be looking for ways to upgrade the roster. And when you're talking about this team, like if you do run it back and you add a backup point guard and all of a sudden Sexton's back in the mix and your 14th overall pick, you're drafting a player there, like the rotation gets very like the minutes that are available deplete in a hurry. And I think you have to ask questions about a Jetty Osman or a Dylan Windler of, is this worth the investment that we've made from a financial standpoint? Are we going to be able to give them the opportunity to earn minutes? Or are we prioritizing other players? So really Wade and Stevens are the two that make the most sense to me.
They feel the safest.
Yeah. And Brandon Goodwin, I wouldn't really expect him to be back. Like I like what he brought to the table, but I think he's going to be looking for a bigger role than what the Cavs will be able to offer for him. I think the Cavs are looking for a little bit more security in that backup point guard position. That's why they went out and got Ricky Rubio last year. That's why they took a shot with Rajon Rondo, because that was cheap, which worked out for some games, didn't work out for others. So I'd be a little surprised if Goodwin was back. Wouldn't hate Moses Brown being back. RJ Nembhard, two-way deal, perfectly fine with him being with the Charge. So no real strong feelings there from me.
Yeah, I think we move on. I think Wade and Stevens are freaking awesome. That is what I will leave that question on.
Love those guys. I mean, those are some of my favorite stories this year. Big combo question from Josh. Come on, Cavs and Don Vinsanity. Projected starting five in our eyes. And one of the questions that was kind of lumped in there was, would you consider starting Wade over Lowry? Carter, as you just profess your love for him.
Yeah, I accidentally already answered. I think it's just Darius. It's the starting lineup to start this past season until proven otherwise. Darius, Colin, Lowry, Evan, and Jarrett. And I don't think there's a particularly compelling case to do anything else.
Yeah, like I guess the Wade argument is he's a better perimeter defender than Lowry. But I really do think you need that offensive juice and the gravity that Lowry provides. And
if Colin was an elite and quick trigger 3-point shooter, you could talk me into Wade, but he's not.
I don't know if you even could. Like I think Lowry was awesome, especially with those two. Like I think some of the issues that we had with him defensively was more when he had to play at the 4 or play with Kevin Love. I think that's where you saw a lot of those issues. I'm basically in the same boat as you. The only thing I would add is Karis LeVert isn't coming off major knee surgery. So it's possible that he would be starting at the 2, assuming that everybody's back. If Sexton is himself, I would lean Sexton, especially assuming that you're investing a new contract with him and all that. Like, I think that comes into play. And as I said before, I think the easiest way to stagger he and Garland is by at least starting them together. So I that's where I lean, but I am open to the possibility, or I'm at least aware of the possibility that LeVert might be the better option if Sexton needs to come along slowly and play his way back into that game shape.
Yeah, if Colin's not healthy, that's different. But I just think there's just if LeVert had been awesome or Okoro had been awesome, this is an argument. Neither of them were, and Colin has a much bigger track record of being awesome for the Cavaliers.
It's pretty good at basketball. I mean,
pretty good at basketball. I watched some of his highlights the other day. I was like, damn, forgot how good this guy was.
Here's the thing. I think, and this is just me complaining, so I apologize, because I know this isn't the best and most interesting thing we do on this podcast, but I feel like there is this trend where if a player efficiently puts up points on a team that doesn't have a winning record, the easiest way for you to signal that you are smart and you understand the game at a higher level is say those points are empty, because scoring efficiently on a team with a losing record is easy. Anyone does it. Like, it's just one of those things. That's not the case. It doesn't get harder when you have more talent around you. Like, I really think that Sexton, like when you look at it in a vacuum, I think Sexton has probably the third highest ceiling on this team. Like, I think he probably has a higher ceiling than Allen if everything were to come together for him.
I would have agreed with you at the beginning of the year. At the end of the year, I don't know. Jarrett was so good.
But here's the thing, Carter. That is a good thing, that Jared Allen has
news.
made that a conversation, because like that's a really damn good thing, because he is an all-star at 23 years old. He's probably going to be the starting center for Team USA basketball. Like, this guy rocks and is only going to get better from here. So I'm not going to fight someone if you have Allen over Sexton, but I think just in terms of like what he brings to the table, and just offense tends to matter a little bit more in the NBA. That's probably why I give Sexton the nod. But like, he is a very high upside piece for the Cavs, and that's part of why I felt so strongly about bringing him back. Carter, Vinny asks, do we feel like acquiring a wing is necessary? We've already talked about it already, where you're maybe drafting one at 14. Karis LeVert might be playing some minutes at 3. You have Lauri Markkanen. And he also feels like the growth of Lamar Stevens and Dean Wade isn't being considered enough in off-season discussions. And before you answer that, I do want to note, Chris Fedor did mention that Dean Wade has been cleared for on-court activities, meaning he's actually going to get an off-season, which is not something that I necessarily expected. Tremendous news for the Cavs, and tremendous news for Dean Wade, who we're both big fans of on the podcast here.
I'm going to answer that question with another question. Is acquiring a wing necessary to do what? Like, you know, like can they be a good team without acquiring a wing? Absolutely. They were a good team with the wing stable they had this year. I think it is necessary if they want to paper over some of the established weaknesses on the team. In the short term, they will have to continue to account for their wing rotation if they run it back in a way that can sometimes put JB into some boxes. But do I think it's necessary? No. Again, like, if this team stays healthy, they probably win 50 games. So no, I don't think it's necessary. I think they have the capacity to add a wing in the draft, or with a mid-level exception, so why wouldn't you? But necessary? I say nay.
I think I agree with you. I would say that adding a wing is necessary if you want to be a little bit more malleable in how you kind of construct a roster and give JB more options. Because I think one thing we've seen in the playoffs is when teams take your bread and butter away, do you have the lineup versatility to throw out a different look? Do you have the ability to defend in a different way? Like Memphis going away from Steven Adams, one of their most valuable players all season, because they have Brandon Clark, who's a little bit more versatile as a defensive player, or even putting someone like Dylan Brooks on Karl Anthony Towns, because he's never going to put Brooks in the post. Or make him pay for that decision. Like, you need to have, like, I think you need to add a wing if you're going to have that kind of versatility, because as much as I like Dean Wade and Lamar Stevens, like, they're both kind of in that same mold of probably power forwards that can get away with playing some 3. I just think I would like to add another 3-2 or 2-3 into the mix, because I do think that gives you a little bit more versatility. And when you have the personnel to make those type of adjustments, all of a sudden it becomes easier to evaluate JB Bickerstaff on how he makes those adjustments. I mean, one of the things we talked about a ton during this down the stretch was it's just not the personnel to make the adjustments. And I think adding a wing, whether it be through free agency, trade, the draft, that is able to give rotation minutes that the coaching staff feels more confident in. Yeah, I think it's necessary if you want to be a little more versatile and better prepare yourself for the playoffs. Because I think next year, my goal, or at least my expectation, is win a round. That's what I would like to see from the Cavs next year.
Yeah, I think that's a perfectly fair answer. I'm really excited to see what they do with the options available to them.
Cav Sense asks.
I'm excited for this one.
I am too. He asks, can Isaac Okoro be used in a similar way to Bruce Brown Jr. as part of the screen game? He also asks why Brown is more impactful offensively than Okoro, as he doesn't feel that needs to be the case.
Because a couple reasons, pal. One...
You went with pal. That feels aggressive.
Well, yeah, I just think it's a funny question, because Bruce Brown plays as the de facto center in half of his lineups, and defends as the de facto center in half of his lineups, and plays with Kevin Durant, Seth Curry, and Kyrie Irving at minimum from a shooting perspective at all times. The Cavs aren't built to accommodate a Bruce Brown right now in the vast majority of their lineups, nor has Okoro shown, frankly, the disruptive chops that Bruce Brown has shown defensively. I think in terms of being an off-ball impact defender. Bruce Brown is a fiend on the weak side and attacking passing lanes and causing havoc on defense. And then on offense, I really don't think Bruce Brown would do much more than Isaac. If you put Isaac in Bruce Brown's role on offense on Brooklyn right now, I do get why CapSense wants to find that role for Isaac, but I think in a lot of ways Bruce Brown is the product of a very, very optimal environment for a weird player like that.
Yeah. I mean, the tricky thing is, like, Bruce Brown wasn't that impactful all the time. Like, he kind of came into his own later in the season. He was out of the rotation at one point.
He wasn't good for Detroit. I mean, Detroit traded him for a sack of potatoes.
Right. He is 4 years older than Isaac Okoro. Like, this is part of why, like, when I said earlier, I wouldn't move off that group of guys unless it was someone that helps over the next 4 years. Bruce Brown's a great example why, because he's not a prospect with as much talent as Isaac Okoro. But you see the way that guys develop as they start to enter their physical prime. And in terms of the screen game, like, that was something that we brought up on the podcast that I would have liked to see when Jared Allen went out. But that's not something that's easy to implement on the fly. Like, that's not something that Okoro worked on at any point in the offseason. Like, Bruce Brown knows that that's going to be his offensive role, is as a screen setter. He knows what the deficiencies are with the Nets. They have to give up Jared Allen. Like, he was able to prepare for that role in the offseason, where why would Isaac Okoro be preparing for that when you have Evan Mobley and Jared Allen? So that's a real tough thing to implement. But I do think Bruce Brown's a great example of somebody that developed offensively and kind of came into his own as he's older. Again, 4 years older than Isaac Okoro.
4 years older helps. I just think, like, especially defensively, we haven't seen that kind of play from Isaac. Maybe this is a stupid thing to say, but, like, Isaac just isn't chaotic like that. Like, Bruce Brown's got a little bit of chaos in his game.
Isaac's very responsible.
He's too responsible, one could argue. I think that's really what it is. I've decided to pick an aggressive tone for humor.
I noticed that. And for those listening on podcast, you missed how smug Carter looked as he was giving that answer.
Yeah, I just thought it was fun. I don't know why.
His head.
I don't know why I thought it was so fun to answer it that way, but I just wanted to. So apologies, CapSense.
Wildly smug.
But no, I just think Isaac's not there yet, nor do the Cavs have the ability to accommodate that kind of play style right now. And that combo means it's just not going to happen in that way. And if I'm Isaac, I'm still working on my corner threes and my ball handling package, because those are the two things that are holding him back the most.
Yeah, that would be my priority, because even if you look at the second unit, like, let's say backup point guard, Sexton, LeVert, Love, Mobley's probably going to play the backup five as he did. Like, where is the screen setting coming from Isaac? Like, if Okoro's on the court there with some combination of that group, you're not going to be asked to do that. So I do think that, like, that is maybe something you explore down the road. If, like, the offensive game doesn't come for Okoro, maybe this is a way that we can weaponize him. But right now, like, when I see Isaac playing his best, when he had his great games, he's doing it as a cutter. He's pulling from three. He's showing good passing chops on the move, like stuff that can be weaponized, and if he develops his skill, can become an important part of what the Cavs do. I think going the Bruce Brown route is something that maybe you explore down the road if you're not able to unlock his offensive game, is probably the best way that I would frame it.
That is fair. Cosign.
King Vin asks, Among many others that ask this question, should we bring Ricky Rubio back or go younger at the backup point guard position? This also ties into a question asked by Andrew, who asked, should we pursue Rubio if we had the chance to add someone like a Tyus Jones?
I think Rubio is a nice outcome, but I'm worried about him being ready to play and not having lost too much. I mean, a second ACL tear is scary. I mean, I would love to have him back. I just loved him. But, I do think the Cavs should be really smart about keeping their options open. Tyus Jones is an interesting big spend. I think you're going to have to spend most of the mid-level on a guy like that.
I think he's going to go for more than that. Like, if he
makes 7.6 right now per spot track.
Yeah, but he's also
due
a big
a
part of
raise.
why Memphis was able to be so good when Ja was out.
That's what I'm saying is he's proven he's at least as good as Pat Beverly, who's making a good chunk of change this year. So a guy like that, I'm not sure is going to be gettable. I think he's an interesting guy to chase. I do worry about these super small point guards because one of the problems with a small point guard is it gets harder to play him with Darius. And unless the Cavs are more happy, and maybe that problem goes away now that you might have Karras and Colin on the wing, and maybe you are just looking for 15 minutes of point guard play. But even in that paradigm, I just go back to, why don't you just get someone for the minimum that's pretty good, like Raul Neto, and just just kind of play it a little close to the vest and invest elsewhere, knowing full well that when it matters, Darius is going to be playing 43 minutes and Colin is going to be playing at least 35 and Karras is going to be playing at least 25, and then all of a sudden, where's the minutes for this backup point guard? I think I just talked myself into a minimum signing, Justin.
Tyus is a guy that almost strikes me like if you can get him for the mid-level, I would. I think he fills the role that we were kind of talking about going into the trade deadline that Derek White could have, filled, where you're getting just 96 minutes of very good guard play in different combinations, and you're able to get away with playing multiple guards because of how good your front court is defensively. Like, I think that's an interesting possibility. I think he's going to go for more than that. I honestly do. Like, if Doug McDermott prices his way out of the mid-level exception, I think Tyus Jones will do the same.
That's fair.
Especially when you look at how he's performing on such a big stage. I think someone like DeLon Wright interests me a lot. Like, I don't think he'd cost the full mid-level, but that's someone that takes away those size concerns that you had, Carter. And you feel really good about him playing with a Sexton or Garland, or even Karras LeVert. Like, there's a lot of combinations you can do there. When it comes to Ricky Rubio, I think if you were bringing Ricky back, you're almost not bringing him back for next season, because even if he comes back, I don't think he's automatically going to be someone that can play the kind of minutes that we were seeing before. Maybe that is where you bring in a Neto as well, and you say, okay, Ricky, you might be able to give us some on the court, but you're really here for the vibes. You're here to be a coach. You're here to be a mentor, and it's going to have to be cheap. But I as much as I love Ricky Rubio and I'd love to have him in the mix, you can't rely on that, because that's a 2-year injury for young players. To get all the way back to where they were, as my hair goes absolutely nuts.
I was noticing that. I didn't know if I should say anything.
No,
I was actually visibly reacting. If you look at the VOD of what's going on with Justin Taylor?
Yeah, I was too. It's getting to that point.
I'm glad you addressed it.
You're welcome. A little bit popped out of the hat. You just hate to see that. Gotta hate curly hair. But yeah, I don't have confidence in that being the backup plan. I think it's going to take next season and then probably get back into the mix the following year. But at that point, he's a lot older. So you'd have to sign 2 point guards is basically my thinking. And that's probably not an easy sell. You're probably getting into the Hartenstein territory at the point guard position of, hey, if we're fully healthy and when Ricky's back, I don't know if there's going to be minutes for you. That's a really tough sell to a free agent.
There's just so many interesting point guards on the market that you can probably get for pretty affordable. Guys like Gary Payton II is an unrestricted free agent. Raul Neto, unrestricted free agent. Austin Rivers, unrestricted. Dragic. There's so many players that I think you can get for relatively cheap. That can eat those 10 to 15 minutes and sometimes more. I do think, however,
and we don't know what's available in the trade market. Maybe there's a point guard making around $7 million, and there's a possibility to move a Jetty Osman or do some other kind of move. What if the Knicks are looking to get off salary and they call you and they say, hey, we have Alec Burks available along with another contract, and can we move it for one of your expiring contracts? Because I think the Cavs have nearly $60 million in expiring or non-guaranteed contracts. That's going to be maybe a possibility that the Cavs have to consider, especially if they're adding depth on the wing. What do you do with Kevin Love, who's coming up at the end of his deal, or Larry Markkinen? Maybe there's opportunities that we can't see. We didn't see Rubio coming last offseason. There was no noise. We had no idea that he was available on the trade market, and the Cavs addressed it via trade. So it is hard to fully gauge what's even within the realm of possibility when it comes to the backup point guard position.
Yeah, it's Kobe is leaves no stone unturned. We weren't expecting Rondo either.
That's a good point. Friend of the podcast, Bron Jetty, asks, what main improvement we would like to see from Garland, Mobley, and Allen if you had to pick one?
For Garland, I'd want to see. He was so freaking good. I'd pass. For Mobley,
that's so boring. I'm not letting you off the hook for that.
I need a second to think about him. Okay. Mobley, I think it's spot shooting. And Allen, I think it's short roll passing. And okay. I need to think about Darius, but you go first. You go with yours while I think.
Garland, I would like to see improvement at the rim, whether it be drawing fouls at the rim and learning how to sell that contact better, or finishing through it. I would like to see the improvement at the rim, because he was fine at the rim. But I do think that if he learns how to draw fouls in those situations or better sell that contact, I don't want him to go full grifter, but just make it more known that you're getting hammered. I think that would go a long way, even to kind of helping secure his health, because I do think when you look at Sexton and Garland, the fact that teams can just tee off on them every time that they do a layup, that is not great for their health. And I think if all of a sudden they're starting to find ways to consistently draw whistles in those situations, it makes teams think twice about putting the body into you. Mobley, I agree. I think shooting, but we're about to get into that with a question Chris Manning asked. So I'll leave that for a second. Jared Allen, I agree with your short roll passing, but I wouldn't hate a corner three. If I could add a corner three for him, even the Brook Lopez development path, I think that would be really interesting, because I think it opens up so many possibilities for a guy like Isaac, or we got slashers coming back. We've got Colin coming back in the mix. Hopefully Isaac Okoro, you're hoping that he takes a step forward. Garland, LeVert, all these guys. I'd like to see him be able to pop out. I think that would be a fun development if I could just add one thing randomly to these guys.
I'm stealing your grifting questions, and Justin, it's Millie's bedtime. Can we wrap, my friend?
Okay, quickly, I do want to get to Chris Manning's question. I think you've already answered, but if you could choose between shot making or strength for Mobley, what's more important for you two, Carter?
I'm going with shot making. Strength will come.
I'm going shot making as well, because I think when you look at the screen setting for Mobley, I think it's technique more than strength. He was actually surprisingly strong this year. And when I look at the videos of him already working on his jumper as the pop man in a double drag scenario, that's the type of stuff that really, really gets me excited. So I'm going to say shot making for Evan Mobley. The strength is definitely going to come. Maybe I'm already taking the strength for granted, so I'm cheating with this question. Chris, I'm sorry. I thought we'd be able to get a little more into this, but Papa Carter, just had to cut us short. You hate to see it. Big thanks to everyone that submitted questions, whether it's via Twitter, via Discord, or via the Chase Down communities on Twitter. I still don't necessarily know what to do with that, but I appreciate all the questions we got via that. If you're listening via YouTube, support us by liking, subscribe, click the notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast, leave us a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of the Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of that review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. Until next time, go Cavs.